Liam Vance, the founder and chief executive of Vance Technologies, VTech, was accustomed to the quiet hum of power that surrounded him, a sound almost as constant as the gentle buzz of the fluorescent lights in his exclusive corner booth at the Apex, the city's most discreet and expensive cafe. And on this particularly tense Tuesday morning, that hum was dangerously amplified by the stress of a $5 billion deal that could either double his company's valuation or crush his legacy. For 6 straight weeks he had lived on a frayed nerve ending, fueled by triple espresso shots, and the unshakable fear that something, somewhere, was fundamentally wrong with the impending acquisition of AstraCorp, a fear that was a cold, hard knot in his stomach even as his top corporate lawyer, Robert, leaned in, whispering final contract changes into the high-security satellite phone Liam held pressed to his ear. The massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the Apex provided a stunning, yet detached view of the frantic city below, a world moving too slowly for Liam's current volatile state, and he was absolutely rigid with focus, his jaw tight as he tracked the crucial rapid-fire negotiations taking place on the other end of the line, just moments away from securing the final critical valuation number that would lock the future of VTech into place. This intensity meant he saw the world only in terms of efficiency, and anyone or anything that momentarily broke his laser-like concentration was not just a distraction, but an obstacle, a threat to the carefully constructed ecosystem of his success, which brought him like a wrecking ball of stress and ego into direct and devastating conflict with a young woman named Eliza. Eliza was a server at the Apex, quiet to the point of near invisibility, moving through the dining room with a spectral grace, born of a deep, almost painful shyness, and today she was clearing a neighboring table, her focus meticulous as she balanced a tray loaded with delicate, expensive ceramics. But the combination of the cramped space, a slight tremor in her hand from a missed breakfast, and the sheer tension radiating off Liam's booth created a perfect, unavoidable accident, just as the voice on Liam's phone began to rattle off the critical, final liquidity metric, the number that could not be wrong. Eliza's hip brushed against the leather arm of his chair, a near imperceptible nudge that was for Liam, a catastrophic jolt causing his hand to slip, the phone's speaker to briefly graze his cheek, and the most crucial 2 digits of the number to become muffled static in his ear. The line went silent as the counterparty waited for confirmation, and Liam's control snapper of 6 weeks of sleepless nights and billion-dollar risk, erupting in a sudden, brutal wave, directed entirely at the trembling figure beside him. He slammed the phone onto the glass table, the noise echoing unnaturally loud in the quiet room, and his voice, usually modulated and authoritative, became a loud, raw scold that cut through the polite silence of the elite clientele. He leaned across the table, his face a mask of white-hot fury, and hissed, not caring that every head in the room had turned to stare, demanding to know how someone could be so careless, so utterly inept, so aggressively oblivious to the gravity of the work being done mere inches from her, accusing her of having the spatial awareness of a distracted child, and demanding in a tone dripping with contempt that she immediately rectify the mistake of her presence and return to the kitchen. The sudden public humiliation hung heavy in the air of the Apex, a moment of profound, painful silence that felt stretched and warped, focusing all the harsh, brilliant light onto Eliza, who stood frozen, her eyes wide and dark, her cheeks burning with a shame so intense it felt physically painful, like a punch to the chest. Liam Vance, breathing hard and fast, the adrenaline rush of his misplaced anger now flooding his system, felt a momentary, cruel relief at having vented the pressure, though a tiny, cold voice in the back of his mind, the rational, successful voice he usually obeyed, immediately registered the excessive nature of his outburst and the unnecessary cruelty of his words, realizing he had used a cannon to deal with a fly, simply because the cannon was already loaded and pointed. Meanwhile, Eliza, who was trained to manage difficult guests with robotic efficiency, managed to find the strength to give a single shaky, barely audible apology, the words swallowed by the opulent velvet drapes and polished marble floors that now seemed to mock her, and she immediately began the task of cleaning up the barely visible spill of water that had been the catalyst for this disaster, retrieving the glass pitcher and wiping down the section of the table with a cloth that felt suddenly heavy and coarse in her hands. As she leaned in close to Liam's side of the table, her mind was a useless jumble of self-recrimination, replaying his exact, scathing words, but her hands, acting on muscle memory and meticulous habit, continued to move, and her eyes, still blurry with unshed tears, glanced down at the papers Liam had scattered in his rage, noting the complex flowcharts, the dense, tiny print of a legal summary, and a single, brightly colored printout that had curled slightly at the edge. It was this curled paper that snagged her attention for a fleeting less-than-second moment, a small, almost hidden line of code in the bottom corner of a technical specification sheet, a seemingly random ultimary string that read A7101 PLC, followed by a series of digits that looked like a telephone number but was too long and began with an unusual 8831 prefix. This detail was completely meaningless to her immediate surrounding, yet the way the text was rendered, in a slightly different font weight and color than the rest of the document, almost like a watermark or a ghost, registered in her deep, analytical memory, a memory honed by years of quietly observing patterns, faces, and details, as she navigated the demanding, chaotic landscape of the service industry, while simultaneously trying to manage her profound social anxiety. Liam, having regained his composure, gave a curt, dismissive wave of his hand to indicate she was dismissed, and he quickly picked up his satellite phone, concluding his call with a cold, formal efficiency that suggested the previous outburst had never occurred, his attention already completely refocused on the billions at stake, not on the broken confidence of the girl he had just eviscerated. He stood abruptly, signaling his exit to his waiting assistant and lawyer, and as he walked quickly past Eliza, he didn't spare her a second glance, already moving into the secured elevator, entirely unaware of the profound and accidental gift of observation she had just given him, a tiny, quiet detail that now rested, unbidden, in the corner of her mind, a quiet seed of suspicion planted amidst the loud, echoing wreckage of his fury. For the next 3 days, the $5 billion acquisition of Astra Corp consumed Liam Vance, yet the closer he got to the final signing, the more the cold dread he'd felt earlier intensified, no longer a simple gut feeling, but a persistent, irritating psychological itch, like a low-frequency hum he couldn't switch off, a stark and unsettling contrast to the relentless optimism of his entire executive team, who were celebrating the deal as the crowning achievement of his career. Liam threw his internal audit team at the documents for a fourth, more aggressive pass, demanding they find the source of his anxiety, forcing them to run complex financial models and penetrating security scans, but their reports came back clean, concluding that Astra was solid, secure, and ready for integration, leaving Liam to conclude that his doubt was simply the crushing weight of risk, manifesting as paranoia, a side effect of operating at the extreme altitude of global finance. Meanwhile, in the quiet, methodical world of the apex, Eliza could not shake the memory of the strange watermarked code and prefix she had seen on Liam's document, a detail so out of place that it had lodged itself in her mind, a stark piece of visual noise against the dense financial prose, and her intense shyness, which usually crippled her ability to act, was strangely countered by a powerful, growing sense of intellectual curiosity and professional responsibility. During her mandated 10-minute breaks, while the bustling, wealthy lunch crowd swirled around the cafe, Eliza sat in the small, staff-only break room, hunched over her aging laptop and the cafe's public Wi-Fi, her movements as cautious and focused as they were when carrying a tray of delicate china, performing simple, precise searches. She ran the string CA7101 PLCA holder through open-source code repositories and technical forums, a seemingly random act that yielded nothing conclusive, until she paired it with the unusual prefix 8831. That was when the first, tiny crack of light appeared. A deep dive into an obscure cybersecurity blog revealed a detailed analysis of sophisticated state-sponsored corporate espionage tactics, specifically noting that the 8831 prefix was a rarely used, highly specific signature for an outdated bespoke backdoor injection method designed to bypass standard corporate firewalls during large-scale network mergers. The blog post described how this method often used innocuous-looking placeholder strings, much like the one she had seen, to mask a command and control signal that would only activate upon system integration. This was the moment the intellectual curiosity turned to a terror of absolute certainty. The acquisition target was not just flawed, it was a ticking, hidden bomb, engineered to go off the moment VTech plugged it into their system, designed to cause a catastrophic company-wide data breach that would inevitably cripple VTech's entire infrastructure and reputation. The juxtaposition of the two worlds was stark and dramatic. Liam, surrounded by hundreds of experts, billions of dollars, and the most advanced security protocols money could buy, was blind, paralyzed by the weight of expectation and his own team's clean reports, while Eliza, the humiliated waitress, using a public Wi-Fi connection and a memory for detail, held the only piece of genuine critical information that mattered, but she remained trapped by her own anxiety and the insurmountable wall, separating her humble reality from his fortress of elite security. Eliza felt the cold, hard weight of responsibility settle on her, a burden far heavier than any tray of silverware she had ever carried, the full, terrifying realization dawning that she, the person Liam Vance had so carelessly dismissed as inept, was the sole person who knew his company was walking into a technological ambush. A shy nature which usually made it impossible to speak to a stranger, now warred with a compelling moral urgency, a sudden fierce need to save the thousands of jobs, the entire legacy she knew the acquisition's failure would obliterate, and she spent her last few breaks running increasingly focused searches, confirming that the backdoor signature she'd identified was linked to a known group specializing in industrial sabotage, meaning the AstraCorp deal was not an accidental vulnerability, but a targeted hostile takeover disguised as a merger. The technical specificity of the code string, A7101 PLCE holder, was confirmed as a signature for a dormant, system-wide data siphon, once integrated with VTech server infrastructure, would quietly bleed the company's most valuable intellectual property to a third-party competitor within 48 hours, causing an instantaneous loss that would utterly destroy VTech's market position. Overwhelmed by the enormity of her discovery, Eliza tried every logical channel to contact Liam Vance. She found the general VTech corporate line and was immediately rerouted to an automated switchboard, where she was dismissed by an increasingly skeptical series of receptionists and assistants, who demanded to know her name, her affiliation, and the exact nature of her query, all information she couldn't fully provide without sounding like a crazy person trying to disrupt a major financial transaction. Her attempts to use the contact CEO email address resulted in an automated bounce back, and when she tried to call Liam's executive assistant Jane, whose number she found on a discarded business card, the assistant cut her off mid-sentence with a frosty, dismissive tone, instructing her not to waste company time with conspiracy theories from the public, and warning her against any further contact. The clock, however, was relentlessly ticking toward the final signing ceremony, scheduled for 9:00 a.m. the next morning, and Eliza, sitting alone in her small, cramped apartment miles away from the glittering high-rises of Vance Technologies, knew that her window was rapidly closing, that every logical attempt to breach the bureaucratic wall surrounding the billionaire had failed, and that the only remaining path was a desperate, illogical act of pure, terrifying confrontation. She knew she had to bypass the system. She had to somehow break through the iron curtain of assistance and security, and she had to get the exact code and the terrifying truth directly into the hands of the one person who would recognize the detail for what it was, the one person who had been inexplicably searching for a flaw he couldn't name, the man who had screamed at her over a few drops of water. The air in Liam Vance's $40 million penthouse was thick with a tense, oppressive silence, the kind that precedes a storm, even as the city lights glittered below like scattered diamonds. And he stood staring out at the expansive view, his hands gripping the cool glass railing of his balcony, his mind numb from the endless cascade of clean reports and positive assurances about the AstraCorp acquisition. The final contract documents were spread across a massive, minimalist glass table, waiting for his signature at sunrise, and while his logical mind told him the deal was sound, his cold dread persisted, an absolute certainty that his entire legacy was about to be leveraged on a foundation of sand, but he had no proof, no fact, no scrap of evidence to justify delaying a $5 billion transaction and exposing himself to a brutal media backlash and shareholder revolt. Across town, in the deep shadows of the early evening, Eliza was making her desperate, final move, no longer thinking but simply acting on a primal instinct to prevent disaster, and she changed out of her work uniform, putting on a plain jacket that felt like a shield, and took a taxi to the district where she knew VTech's corporate headquarters were located, remembering from her careful observations that Liam's personal driver, a stern man named Frank, usually waited in the same alleyway near the apex until precisely 7:30 p.m. to collect his boss. She arrived just before the designated time, her heart hammering a loud, painful rhythm against her ribs, and found Frank scrolling on his phone, the sleek black sedan, idling quietly, an intimidating fortress of power and exclusivity that seemed impossible to approach. But Eliza forced herself forward, stepping into the edge of the alley's muted light, her voice a reedy whisper when she finally spoke his name. Frank, a man of routine and rigid loyalty, initially glared at her, ready to dismiss the sudden intrusion, but Eliza, her desperation giving her a strange, quiet power, didn't ask. She simply commanded, her words sharp and focused in a way they never were when serving tables, stating with absolute conviction that she had a piece of information that would save Miss Vance's company, and that she needed to pass a note to him directly, immediately, and only to him, refusing to offer any further explanation. Frank, sensing the raw, unadulterated terror and sincerity in her eyes, a look that cut through the polished facade of his guarded world, hesitated for a crucial 2-second window, and Eliza capitalized on the moment, thrusting a small, folded piece of thick white paper into his hand, the note containing only the two crucial, undeniable truths: A7.01, PLCE, holder, 8831, Astra, back door. Then, she simply turned and walked away, disappearing into the pedestrian crowd before Frank could ask a single question, leaving the driver staring at the cryptic 3-word message and the strange code. Frank, knowing his boss's notorious and unexplained paranoia about the Astra deal, made the executive decision that broke his professional protocol. He immediately drove back to the penthouse, bypassed the security desk by invoking an emergency, and handed the folded note directly to Liam Vance, who was still staring out at the city, lost in his silent, cold dread. Liam unfolded the paper, his eyes flicking over the clean, simple script, instantly recognizing the specific code string that had been partially visible on his financial document days ago, and a chill that had nothing to do with the outside temperature shot down his spine. He first dismissed the note as a malicious, psychotic prank from the crazy waitress he'd humiliated. Of course she'd remember that one detail, but the chillingly specific use of the 8831 prefix and the phrase backdoor, the technical precision of the warning, the one fact his multi-million-dollar audit team had missed, made him physically gasp, an instinctual animal response to imminent danger that finally shattered his paralysis. The moment Liam Vance saw the technical precision of the code and the explicit phrase, Astra, backdoor, on the humble note, the last vestiges of his arrogance and disbelief evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard certainty that the shy waitress, the person he had publicly shamed, was not only telling the truth, but was also the only person in the world who could have seen and retained that single critical piece of data. He immediately cancelled his flight to the signing ceremony, citing an invented, sudden and critical health emergency, which instantly threw his PR and legal teams into a panic. But he paid them no mind, his focus now solely on the existential threat hanging over VTech, and he locked down his penthouse, contacting his most trusted external security consultant, a ghost in the world of corporate cyber defense, named Dr. Elias Thon, whom he had used in the past for highly sensitive matters. Liam did not mention the source of the information, protecting Eliza's anonymity and the secrecy of the desperate handover. He simply relayed the exact code and prefix, A7101 PLCE holder, 8831, and gave Thorne a single, urgent instruction: find out what this means inside Astra Corp's core network. You have until dawn. The ensuing 6 hours were a dynamic, tense blur, a rapid-fire technological investigation conducted remotely from Liam's penthouse, with Thorne and his small, elite team using the provided string as a master key to bypass the standard, high-level security that VTech's auditors had been unable to penetrate. Within 2 hours, Thorne's terse, chilling confirmation arrived via an encrypted channel. The code was exactly as Eliza's research had indicated: an active, dormant, high-privilege backdoor access point, a trapdoor deliberately left open and disguised to resemble a routine diagnostic placeholder. The deeper Thorne dug, the more horrifying the reality became, revealing a meticulously constructed vulnerability that was not simply an error, but a highly sophisticated, multi-stage sabotage operation orchestrated by a major, unnamed competitor. And the integration of Astra into VTech's system would have triggered the siphon, a data leak mechanism designed to exfiltrate VTech's core AI algorithms and proprietary client lists, causing a projected loss of over $8 billion in market capitalization within the first week alone, a financial catastrophe that would have certainly led to the company's immediate collapse and inevitable bankruptcy. Liam Vance sat in stunned, nauseating silence as the evidence piled up. The quiet, gentle girl he had cruelly belittled had not only saved his professional life, his fortune, his legacy, but she had seen the crucial flaw that the collective efforts of hundreds of highly paid experts had missed, an oversight that had been blinded by their own high-level assumptions and the sheer volume of documents. The shame he now felt was absolute, a crushed physical weight that made his previous arrogant rage seem like the spoiled tantrum of a child, and the realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had mistaken meticulous observation for simple ineptitude, arrogance for confidence, and he owed the very existence of Vance Technologies and every employee's future to the quiet woman he had demanded be removed from his sight. The fallout was immediate and dramatically swift across the global financial landscape. At precisely 8:58 a.m., 2 minutes before the scheduled multi-billion-dollar acquisition signing, Vance Technologies publicly announced the indefinite suspension of the Astra Corp deal, citing unforeseen and critical, newly revealed security vulnerabilities within Astra's framework, an official, terse statement that instantly ignited a media firestorm of speculation, accusation, and frantic stock trading. But VTech remained structurally intact, securely protected from the technological time bomb they had narrowly avoided. Liam Vance, the immediate crisis, successfully averted, thanks to the swift actions he took based on the Waitress's cryptic note, spent the day managing the internal chaos, launching an immediate covert investigation into which competitor was behind the massive sabotage operation. But his focus kept returning, relentlessly, to one inescapable truth: the humble, overlooked source of his salvation. He knew he could not simply send a check or a formal letter of thanks to the young woman. The depth of his debt and the severity of his previous cruel misconduct demanded a personal, painful, and complete act of atonement, a confrontation that had to happen on her turf, under the same harsh public lights, where he had so unfairly humiliated her days earlier. The following afternoon, just as the predictable lull between the intense lunch and dinner service settled over the apex, Liam walked back into the cafe, not in his usual domineering armored power suit, but in a simple, dark-adorned blazer, his posture intentionally subdued, carrying no phone, no assistant, no briefcase, a figure unrecognizable as the corporate titan who had raged days earlier. He spotted Eliza immediately, quietly polishing and folding napkins at a service station near the back, her eyes downcast as usual, and the sight of her sent a fresh, powerful wave of corrosive shame through him, a physical ache of profound, soul-deep regret. As he approached in, his steps slow and deliberate, the familiar, crippling wave of shyness instantly washed over Eliza, and she instinctively braced herself, expecting another tirade, ready to absorb the inevitable, sharp criticism she assumed he had returned to deliver. But Liam stopped a respectful, measured distance away, his voice low, measured, and completely stripped of the corporate dominance and arrogance she had experienced before. He didn't thank her first, nor did he offer an explanation for the cancelled deal. Instead, he apologized, the words coming out as a straight, genuine admission of his failure. He admitted that his stress had been no excuse for his cruelty, confessed that his previous, sharp words were unforgivable, and told her, without varnish, without excuse, that he had been entirely and spectacularly wrong about acknowledging the immense disrespect he had shown her mind and her very presence. Then, and only then, did he tell her the unbelievable truth. He pulled out the crumpled note from his pocket, the one Frank had delivered, laid it gently on the clean white linen beside the stack of napkins, and explained in forensic detail that this single, small piece of paper, containing a specific technical code and a two-word warning, had saved Vance Technologies from a catastrophic existential ambush orchestrated by a rival. He finished by stating that the quiet intelligence and meticulous observation she possessed had proven to be infinitely more valuable than the combined collective efforts of his entire multi-million-dollar audit team, and he looked her straight in the eye, maintaining the focus of his attention, a gesture of absolute, unreserved respect. For the very first time, Eliza, still silent, no longer trembling, finally looked up, meeting his gaze, her dark eyes clear and analytical, and in that tense, profound moment, the power dynamic that had defined their last encounter shifted completely, transforming the interaction from a billionaire scolding a waitress into two essential people acknowledging a powerful, life-altering truth. The deep, meaningful silence that followed Liam's confession and his display of the crumpled, company-saving note was not awkward, but profound, a space of mutual, intense understanding where the noise of past arrogance and the sting of humiliation finally died away, and Eliza held his gaze, an unprecedented act of quiet strength she hadn't known she possessed, realizing that this humbled, powerful man was offering her something far more valuable than a tip, a bonus, or a financial payout. He was offering genuine, unreserved respect and profound recognition for her mind, for the extraordinary pattern-seeking skill of observation that her shyness had always kept hidden. Liam did not wait for her formal response to the apology. He moved straight to the essential, practical matter, presenting her with an offer that was not a charitable handout, but a deeply earnest, high-stakes professional challenge born of his immediate and profound corporate need, explaining that Vance Technologies was immediately establishing a new corporate intelligence and non-traditional risk assessment division, a tiny elite team whose sole vital function would be to identify the soft intelligence risks, human errors, and subtle patterns that standard algorithmic audits and automated security systems consistently missed. He offered her the position of lead intelligence analyst, a pivotal role that would be entirely centered around the unique, granular, pattern recognition power of her brain, a position that required meticulous focus and rewarded quiet, deep observation, and he made it unequivocally clear that her value to VTech was not in front-facing communication, but in back-end insight, telling her with absolute sincerity that his company desperately needed the meticulous quiet of her thought process, not the loud, often distracting performance of a typical executive. Eliza, still processing the shock, did not ask about the salary, the benefits package, or the prestige of the role. She simply asked, in a quiet, firm voice that surprised both of them, if the job meant she would be doing something truly essential, something that mattered, something that used her peculiar talent for seeing what others deliberately ignored. And Lee, humbled to the core by the depth and pure ethical nature of her question, assured her that she would in fact be the essential, quiet guard of his company's entire multi-billion-dollar future. She accepted with a single, clear nod, a profound, life-altering decision made with a clarity and decisiveness that belied her usual demeanor. 2 weeks later, Eliza Vance, no longer the quiet waitress, sat at a high-tech, minimalist desk in a quiet, glassed-in office on the 55th floor of Vance Technologies headquarters, a space designed specifically for focused, uninterrupted thought, her new job a universe away from the bustling, chaotic reality of the apex, yet profoundly connected to it by the very skill she had honed there, the innate ability to see and remember the tiny, misplaced detail that everyone else was either too busy, too arrogant, or too high-level to even acknowledge. She was still quiet, still meticulous, still preferring the silent world of data patterns over noisy human interaction, but the crippling shyness was gone, replaced by the quiet, absolute, resolute confidence of a person who knew their own irreplaceable worth. And Liam Vance, forever changed and deeply chastened by the near catastrophe, and the unassuming girl who saved him, learned the most important career-defining lesson of his entire life, that the true measure of a company's security, and the source of the most vital intelligence, often does not rest on the price of its technology, but on the overlooked integrity, quiet intelligence and profound attention to detail found in the most unassuming corners of the working world.